All right, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of stillcurtain.com. And joining me, as always, is contributor Shayne Kubas. We are 2-0. Shayne, Pittsburgh Steelers coming off a second straight victory. But it wasn't the convincing win that we all had hoped for. It was more of the slugfest that we all predicted. And so we're going to talk about the Steelers defeating the Broncos here. We're going to break down every phase of the game, the most notable players. We have to talk about Broderick Jones today, Shayne, because everything that's happening with him is just so from start to finish, it's been bizarre.
Yeah.
And now watching the struggles, we're going to talk about what the Steelers need to do and what we expect them to do moving forward. We're also going to break down the Steelers Week 3 matchup against the Los Angeles Chargers. So stay with us for that. And Shayne and I will give our game predictions for Week 3 as soon before we sign off on today's show. But let's start with the trending topics around the Steelers this week, Shayne, and let's just discuss this Broncos, the win over the Broncos real quick here. Did this game go exactly the way that you anticipated? Did you think that the Steelers were going to end up scoring more points in this contest, or what were your thoughts on this?
I did think we'd see a little bit more points than we did. We did have, obviously, the nice touchdowns. So we do have one on the board. We have one touchdown on the board. That's good to see. Kind of felt like that was the first thing that had to happen in this game to kind of get us where we needed to go. It was like, let's prove we can get into the end zone. Okay, we did that. Cool. After that, it was a lot of the same stuff we saw in Week 1 where they weren't playing poorly on offense, I don't think, but I think there was too many mistakes and untimely errors that prevented us from putting up more points on the scoreboard, right? And that's kind of where this offense is at right now. You look at it, we'll talk more about it when we break down the game more in depth, but there's a lot of missed opportunities, right? Whether it's penalties, calling back big throws, Fields maybe missing a read or two here, the run game kind of fizzling at the end because they were expecting it every play. Like, there's just some stuff that we need to clean up still, but I think the pieces are there for this offense to be better than it's been production-wise, but they just have to stop making those unforced errors.
Yeah, things were looking encouraging early on in the game. I mean, the second possession, you lead a touchdown drive, capped off with that back shoulder fade to Darnell Washington.
Love that.
The Steelers had momentum. They were looking good. Defensively looked good all game long. Offensively only looked good in the first half. And so if you break down the drives, it was like 78-yard scoring drive off of 12 plays. And then they had like a 48-yard drive and a 57-yard drive. These last two, I'm kind of paraphrasing here.
Right,
but they were moving the football. Second half of the game, offense changes completely. And now you've got like 3 plays for -2 yards and 3 plays for 6 yards. Like, the game plan changed.
Yeah.
Tomlin executed the game plan that he wanted to, which was, when we get on a lead, we're gonna take our foot off the gas pedal and we're gonna minimize risk. They did. They don't have an interception through 2 games, but it's also costing you because you are not putting these games away. You're not scoring the points you need to. Shayne, my biggest issue, and again, I want to be thankful the Steelers are 2-0. I don't know if anybody predicted they would be 2-0. Maybe some people did. It's not like the Broncos were some otherworldly opponent or anything that way, but the Falcons game, going to Atlanta on the road, playing Kirk Cousins, you would assume that one would have been a potential loss there. So I think everybody's satisfied to see the Steelers 2-0 after 2 weeks, but the manner in which you're doing it, 15.5 points per game over your first 2 contests. You got to score points eventually. My biggest issue with this, it comes back to philosophy. When you can't score and you're winning based solely on the backs of your defense, when you get into situations where you have to play a good team, you're playing the Buffalo Bills, you're playing the Kansas City Chiefs, and you're playing against these teams in the playoffs, you're not going to be able to trust your defense to hold other teams under 15 points per game for a 3 to 4 game stretch into the playoffs into become Super Bowl champions, which is what it's all about. It's good enough for the regular season, not good enough for the playoffs. Is that the impression that you get with the way that things have been so far?
Yeah, and actually I wrote about it for stillcurtain.com if you guys want to check it out on there. It's I specifically said the Steelers are exactly what Mike Tomlin wants them to be in the sense that he wants to win with the run game, with occasional big plays, which we've been trying to get, and granted have hit on them, but sometimes penalties have brought them back, and they still hit on a couple, especially Week 1. But they want to run the football, get some big plays, don't turn the football over, and hand it over to the defense that is amazing right now, right? Like, they're playing out of their minds. And I talk about it in that, like, at some point, despite passing being down across the league, despite the fact that the run game is kind of what is in vogue right now, at some point you're going to have to play Patrick Mahomes later this season. You're going to have to probably play a Josh Allen or someone like that in the playoffs. And can you really expect them to put up 15 points, 16 points? You can't ask your defense to do that. They might be able to do it, but you can't expect that. Like, that can't be your only plan to win those games. And I think the problem I have with it is if Fields isn't going to be allowed to do more at any point, I wonder if Wilson is going to come in eventually, because I feel like the only reason that they wouldn't allow Fields to go out there and do more is if they don't trust him at all to do that. And I think so far he's earned their trust that he can do a little bit more than he's being asked to. So that's what I'm most curious about this week, and we'll talk about it later. But when do they allow him to be more of the maker than he's been allowed to be so far? Because that's the key to getting this offense to at least a level where I could believe that they could score enough points against one of those top teams.
Yeah, and I think that's a question everybody wants to see answered sooner, obviously, rather than later. We're going to talk more about that game in just a little bit here. Let's talk about Justin Fields is going to be the starter in week 3. Tomlin didn't come right out and say it. He never does, really.
No,
but
he doesn't.
He alluded to the fact that Russell Wilson is not healthy. We don't need to have this conversation. It's Justin Fields' job, essentially, until Wilson is healthy, and then they will reevaluate from there. So Fields is going to get the start again in week 3. It's the right decision. I thought it was the right decision last week. I don't know where Wilson is in the recovery process, but those calves can turn into an Achilles, and they're just really tricky situations anytime you're dealing with a tissue injury like that. And so I think that going with Fields is the clear-cut choice, especially when you look at how he played in the first half of that game. If you would just allow him to continue playing that way and not dumb down the offense in the second half, I think you would have had better results on the board offensively, but it's so hard to pull him after you're 2-0 right now.
And the thing I will say that is a little frustrating, and I can't say that I'm surprised because we know that this is how this man operates, but at some point Tomlin has to come out and say Fields is the quarterback of this team, because you can't tell me that, especially if he goes and beats the Chargers, right? Like, the Chargers come in and we take care of them. You're going to tell me he's going to take them out? Like, no, because what does Tomlin care about more than anything else? Winning the football game. Doesn't care how you do it, except he does prefer to do it the way they're doing it. But as long as it gets done, and Fields is a part of the reason why it does get done, he's going to keep playing him. And I think at some point it's beneficial just to tell him, and maybe he has, maybe this is something where he just doesn't want to tell it to the media or whatever. But at some point he has to say, like, this is the quarterback of this team. He's going to be the quarterback of this team until proven otherwise. And just kind of ride it out and go from there. And I know Wilson may feel a certain way about that. It sucks for him, but you're 35, you're on the downswing of your career. Fields at least has the opportunity to steal this job for the future. I don't think you can take him out unless it's truly bad.
Yeah, Shane, but I keep going back to that report way back when the Steelers traded for Fields, and Tomlin supposedly said to Russell Wilson, the job is still, the starting job is going to be yours. You're going to be our starter to begin the season. But that has obviously, it's not been the case for injury reasons.
Yes.
But even if Russell Wilson was fully healthy right now, Shane, the guy logged a handful of practices during training camp, a couple series during the preseason, and now we're going to go weeks into, if not months into the NFL season before he plays. How can you give the job back to him when Fields is the healthy guy? Fields is the guy that has had all this time to work with the starters all the time through training camp, preseason, and now it's going to be at least 3 weeks into the season before we see Russell Wilson come back. I think it would be so hard to make the switch back unless things go like really disastrous for Fields here coming up. So I think the decision was easy. I was not surprised to see it. I expected it. And so we get another week of Justin Fields, and we'll see how things go. And maybe Tomlin's kind of looking for that spot where it lines up with Fields having maybe a down week and Russell Wilson being healthy, where it's like, hey, I can fulfill my promise to you now. I can get you in there and we'll see what you got. I don't want it to happen. Fields offers more encouragement, I think, and has shown that he could lead this team potentially if they can start scoring more points. I don't think the results would be any different if Wilson is in there. So for the people complaining about the point totals on the board right now, Tomlin's philosophy, they've gotten a lead the last 2 weeks. They've taken their foot off the gas pedal. I don't think that Russell Wilson really changes that much at all. And so I think that with Fields, you're still moving the chains. Time of possession, they're dominating right now.
Yes.
67 minutes and 50 seconds. I believe that over the first 2 games, it's, I think, 8th in the NFL in time of possession.
Somewhere around there, yeah.
sixth in the NFL in time of possession right now per game. And so they're doing what they want to do. And Tomlin is fine winning these low scoring games. It's what he lives for.
He
wants to see, he would rather see his defense perform well than his offense. I can tell you that for sure. Yeah. So no switch there. Let's talk about some of the injuries that happened this week. Shayne, Tyler Matakavich and Ben Skoranek landed on IR. Matakavich with a hamstring, Ben Skoranek with a shoulder. You hate to see anybody go, even if they're not like quintessential pieces to this Steelers team. They were both core special teamers. Like these guys have already made plays on special teams in just 2 weeks into the season. Skoronek's only been here for 1 week, but Matakavich had a really nice special teams tackle this past week. It hurts you every time you have to do this because then you have to promote guys up from the practice squad and get other players into it there who might not have that familiarity with these roles. Skowronek and Matakavich, both of these guys have been just like core special teamers over the course of their careers. That's what they do. They've logged hundreds of snaps in that area of their game. So this could hurt the Steelers in that phase of the game. It's not going to affect much on offense without Skowronek, not much on defense without Matakavich, but special teams wise, that can hurt.
Yeah, and you don't want to see your special teams unit become a true weakness. I already don't really love the Steelers special teams as a whole anyway. Mm-hmm. Losing guys who have been core special teamers for both the Steelers and other teams throughout their careers definitely is not what you want to see, especially when you're going to be going up against, especially like I really like Darius Davis for the Chargers as a returner. Mm-hmm. That's something I don't want to see be a problem in that game. Obviously, like we need to keep that offense in check as much as possible because ours might not be doing a whole lot. The Chargers defense has been really good to start the year as well as the Steelers has. So definitely don't want to see that become a problem.
Yeah, let's talk about the other signing that they made. I'm not going to go over every single like this. I feel like that's kind of majoring in the minors, Shayne, when we talk about if we spend too much time talking about every single practice squad player. So once they become relevant to the Steelers situation, we'll talk about them. But I do want to talk about James Pierre returning to the Steelers on the practice squad. I would probably expect him to get elevated up here to play special teams and to maybe be one of those gunners there. Yeah. So I think that does have relevancy to what's happening right now. And Pierre, that's what he's known for. That's what he's always done. He started 6 games for the Steelers. Was on Pittsburgh's roster from 2020 to 2023. Played in 66 games, though, during that span. So he was there playing special teams frequently. So he is very familiar with that role. He can step into that position if they need him to, and they do. They need it right now. And then we're talking about Rodney Williams getting elevated. This just happened an hour or so ago. Rodney Williams getting elevated to 53-man roster. This is probably not good news for Michael Pruitt, the Steelers tight end who suffered a knee injury this game. Tomlin didn't offer clarity to the extent of his injury, but obviously it must be bad enough to promote Rodney Williams because the Steelers are going to go with 4 tight ends again.
Yeah, this feels just like a way to replace Pruitt's spot in the 53, or at least in the active 53. I think, unfortunately, like we've had a lot of injuries to like I'm glad it's not the more major players, but a lot of like the back end players have been getting banged up in the last 2 weeks. So got to try to keep that in check there.
All right, we are going to move on, but before we do that, it's the greatest time of the year. Again, football is back, and it's here to stay till February. Over 1 million fans across 33 states got in the game last year by making picks on Underdog. I love Underdog. It's easy and fast to get started and play. This is the added level of entertainment that I've been looking for. Making picks on Underdog is straightforward, and signing up is easier than ever. Just head over to Underdog's simple-to-use mobile app or UnderdogFantasy.com. Sign up with promo code STILLCURTAIN, and Underdog will give you a free pick to use on your first cash pick'em entry, plus up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you deposit. That's Underdog Fantasy, promo code STILLCURTAIN, to claim your new customer special of a free pick and your deposit offer. Must be 18 plus, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, 19 plus Alabama and Nebraska, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. Arizona, 1-800-NEXT-STEP, 1-800-639-8783, or text NEXT STEP to 53342. New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467369. And with that, Shayne, let's talk about the Steelers Broncos game a little bit more in depth here. I want to break down offense, defense, and special teams, what we saw from this game. And let's start with the offense. This was the part that started off really encouraging. Like the plays that Justin Fields was making in this game, that 51-yard dart rolling to his right, throwing on the run, like that's as good as a pass as you will see in the NFL. Unfortunately, it was negated by the Broderick Jones holding call. This came just 2 plays, I think, after the false start. Broderick had 3 penalties on the game. We're going to get to him in just a little bit here. What do you make of? I want to talk about Fields specifically. What did you make of Fields' performance in this game? And did you see a completely different player in the second half of the game compared to the first half? Do you think it was more of the play calling? What were your thoughts watching Justin Fields in week 2?
I think in the first half of the game, he was very much in command of what the offense was asking him to do. And I think that's the key thing with him is that in the past for him, and granted, the offenses he's played in the past probably asked more of him as a quarterback than we're asking of him right now. But you could tell that he's dialed into what they want him to do, and he understands his role on this team, right? It's to be the point guard of the offense, to try to get the ball out to his playmakers, to run with the football whenever that's not available. And the downfield plays is where we can see the most development for him, right? Because he's been a great deep passer statistically in his career in terms of accuracy and getting the ball where it needs to go. But that was a throw that I've seen a lot of good throws from him. I don't think I've ever seen a throw that good from him as an NFL player, at least. And it's really unfortunate that he gets called back for a penalty. I think he would have about another 100+ yards on the season through 2 games if we just didn't get penalties called on those plays. You think of the OPI and George Pickens in week 1, you think of that play. So the plays that he's making are there. It's just that some of them have been called back, right? Like you look at the statistics and you go, oh, he's thrown for like 300 yards or less than 300 yards in 2 games and doesn't have just any touchdowns except for the 1 touchdown pass. Like, yeah, but I think he's playing much better than the statistics would tell you. And it's just they have to find a way to hit on those plays without penalties being called on them. That's pretty much where I'm kind of at with his performance, at least in particular.
Yeah, this is why it's so important not to just check box score stats.
Like you would think that he's one of the worst quarterbacks in the league through 2 games if you looked at it as just a stats.
Yeah, and if you look at this game in context, like we talked about the 51-yarder that was wiped away. Van Jefferson drew the pass interference call deep down the field, like 36-ish yards. I can't remember the exact number there. That is another one that bounced off of his hand, tried to kind of catch it one-handed as his other hand was being tugged a little bit. That could have went in the box score for Fields had that been caught. George Pickens' touchdown that was wiped away. That was an iffy call. I mean, I know
it was iffy.
We all knew Van Jefferson's intention was to run a big play,
but that's not what matters.
And
the ref talked about like
initiated the contact.
I forget who it is for that broadcast, but they were talking about that. Yeah, like
Gene Steratore.
Steratore. Yeah, he said he's like, we all know what the goal of the play is, but you can't just call it because you know that. You have to call it based on how it plays out, right? And if the defensive backs initiate contact, that's on them to not do that when they see a pick play coming. Like they need to adjust to that and play off of that. So there's so many opportunities you look at with the Steelers through 2 weeks. It's like they could easily be scoring about 20 points a game instead of the 15.5 they're scoring right now or whatever it is right now. It just hasn't happened for them, right? And I think it's encouraging to see that they are playing much better offensively overall, even if the results haven't gotten there, because eventually you assume you're not going to get a penalty on over half of your explosive plays. You're not going to have, guys go down and get like, it's just in general, people who are looking at this offense and going, it's the same as last year, that you need to watch the games again or watch them at all if you haven't. Like if you're just looking at the box score, this offense is one of the worst. I think they're closer to a middle of the pack offense in terms of execution so far outside of the penalties.
Yeah, and scoring points is the name of the game. You got to do it eventually, but I do think we see some encouraging signs. These long sustained drives that we've seen so far, you got to find a way to punch it in the red zone. But like you said, that George Pickens touchdown was wiped away from that questionable pick play called on Van Jefferson there. A lot of big plays in this game brought back. And then I think you look at, it's not just that, it's a combination of that, Shayne, with the utter lack of aggressiveness in the second half of the game. Just blatantly saying we're going to run the ball a few times. We're going to throw a non-risky pass short of the sticks, and we're content with chewing some clock and punting the ball back and trusting our defense. That's what they did. It got the job done. but you did not have any of those sustained drives in the second half. They all came in the first half. And so if Arthur Smith would have called the same game plan or been allowed to call the same, and the reason I say that, we know who is the head honcho here. We know who the guy up top is. So, and Tomlin wants to operate that plan. If Arthur Smith would have called the same exact game in the second half as he did the first half, maybe you're looking at a 26-point game. Maybe you're looking at 20 plus for sure. I mean, 13-6 is not the score that I think anybody wants, even though you're seeing good play by the defense. You have to see more offensively to give this team hope that you can compete with the big dogs here.
Yeah. Now, I will say, against a team like the Broncos, starting a rookie quarterback who is clearly not good right now and the offense isn't good, I understand against the team like that wanting to just sit on the ball basically and say, like, listen, go, if you want to beat us, you're gonna have to go drive the length of the field, right? And I understand that. The problem is, if he's gonna do this against good teams too, where you have a 10-point lead in the fourth quarter against, like, let's say we get one against the Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, which I'm not saying we're going to, but if we did, you can't change you have to go for the throat. Like, you have to go for the throat on every play. You have to, because you can't assume that your defense is going to keep him from getting that comeback. And so if we see this against a team that can legitimately go down the field on us at any moment, that's when I'm going to be really concerned about it. But even then, like you said, I would have rather them taken the chance of saying, like, all right, yeah, we might end up with a turnover. We might make a mistake. But we have to try to win games instead of trying to not lose them.
Yeah, Shayne, and let's say this works even for 12 wins this season.
Right.
You execute this strategy where you get a lead because of the running game and because your defense is playing well. When you get into the playoffs, you're not going to know how to score points because you haven't practiced. You haven't practiced it since Ben was here. So that's my biggest beef with this. And again, I don't want to come off as a negative, a Debbie Downer here. The Steelers are 2-0. Thankful for that. But until you show that you're capable of stringing together a 27 or a 30-point game, knowing that you're going to have one of those in a playoff stretch to get there, it's hard to believe it's going to happen. And so I just think that the philosophy is a little bit backwards here. It's working against these teams. Don't think it's going to have the same results when you start playing a better competition here, but we will see. I want to talk about the receiving core here, Shayne. Or lack thereof is probably a better way to put it.
I'm not sure if I know
what is that again?
I'm not.
So George Pickens, really, really good. We know that. I mean, the guy in his stat line would have been phenomenal again this week had he not had the 51-yarder wiped away from that Broderick Jones penalty. Also had a touchdown wiped away. We just talked about that as well. The rest of the unit, however, really, really concerning. I think more concerning than anybody could have even imagined. Like, we knew that it was bad. We knew that Van Jefferson wasn't this great receiver. We knew that he wasn't very good. I mean, we knew that he was borderline rosterable.
Yeah.
But for it to be as bad as it's been through 2 weeks, I don't know if anybody predicted this. So, Shayne, entering week 3, George Pickens has 114 yards. In fact, he had well over 200. It had the plays that over the past 2 weeks not been brought back. Phantom pass interference wiped away a 26-yard reception in week 1. The rest of the receiving core, Van Jefferson, 15 yards in 2 games. Calvin Austin, 13 yards in 2 games. No other Steelers receiver has a reception. That is not the assistance that Pickens needs on the opposite side of him. Like, the Steelers have to get somebody in there. And help me, Roman Wilson, you're my only hope. Like, that's how I'm feeling at this point. Rookie's got to get out there and start making some plays, because 2 games of Van and Calvin Austin have been just the most underwhelming performances imaginable.
So, yes, whenever you look at the numbers, it's not awesome. I will say, to the defense of the receivers on the team that are not named George Pickens, they're not really trying to throw the football to them at all. Like, there's not been many attempts made at doing it. Now, granted, there's a reason for that, because why would you throw to them when you could throw to George Pickens or Pat Freiermuth or even Jaylen Warren? But the production in the passing game just isn't there for a multitude of reasons. But like you said, it's still a lot of the problem is the fact that you're throwing to Calvin Austin and Van Jefferson in those situations if you're not throwing to Pickens or Freiermuth. So I think you hope that Wilson, once he's healthy, just shows that he's better than those guys, and he probably, in my opinion, already is just as a prospect. I liked him a lot, so I think he's better than them now. But again, I also don't know how much that's going to matter production-wise because this team doesn't want to throw the football. Like they simply don't want to. And when they do want to throw it, it's to the guys who are really good. Like not just like, oh, they're a good piece. Like, no, they're like some of the better players in their position in the NFL. So I think until they open up the passing game a little bit more, which I think will happen naturally over the course of the year, even if you, let's say you went out and traded for a receiver or you did elevate Wilson to a starting role once he's healthy, I don't know if you're going to get much production out of the non-Pickens, Freiermuth, maybe backfield type. Like you're just not going to get a lot of it, I don't think, because the attempts aren't going to be there probably. The yards aren't going to be there for the taking a lot. So I will give them a little bit of a pass in that perspective, but the production is just hard to look at the end of the day. You're absolutely correct.
It is, Shayne. And it would be one thing, though, if the production is really bad, but you have a niche, like you're a really good blocker or something. Austin is not a good blocker. Van Jefferson has not been a good blocker.
No, he's been bad, which is really
he's depressing. Been downright terrible. And
he's
so,
supposed to do that.
Yes. So it's honestly like you're getting to the point where it's like, all right, maybe we could have Skoranek on the field. At least the guy can block. But obviously, he's on IR now. This receiving core is so thin. Like now that Skoranek was on IR, he was your number 6. You've got 5 guys on the roster. 3 of them are healthy. Pickens, Van Jefferson, and Scotty Miller. Those are the only healthy receivers. Calvin Austin should be good to go, but he took a huge blow to the head neck area, did not re-enter the game. And then Roman Wilson has yet to play since the very first padded practice of Steelers camp. You've got to go sign somebody else now. Like, get somebody that could do something for you, at least block. Like
at least block.
Get a Miles Boykin type in there.
Yeah, what's he doing right now?
you got to have that type of player at least. But yes, receiving course super concerning. Pickens looks like a legit wide receiver 1. Outside of that, like you said, Shayne, there's not going to be a lot of volume, so we can't just grade these players based on, well, you're directly tied to your production. So if your production's bad, you're terrible. You're doing a bad job. We know that they're not going to get that many targets to begin with in a low volume passing offense, but you have to be good when you are targeted.
And they have not been.
You have to not commit penalties like Jefferson did there. And you have to be good at blocking, and they haven't been good at any of those things right now. No. So that's the part that's frustrating. Let's move over to the offensive line here. Actually, let's reverse that. Let's go to tight ends first. I want to talk about this tight end room.
Sure.
Darnell getting involved. Our guy, our Georgia guy.
So
I like to see them utilizing a 6'7", 270 pound. I mean, that's being light in the pants there.
He's 280 pounds. I'm pretty sure right now.
The guy is huge, and he's got like 100th percentile wingspan. You can box out. Like it was a good pass, and it didn't need to be that low. You could put it anywhere in the vicinity. That's a weapon there. You get matched up against a 5'10" safety. I'm doing that every time. Like audible to that every single time, because you know that Pickens is the guy that's drawing the coverage when you get in the red zone. So were you a fan of that play? I think you were. And how do you want to see Washington being utilized moving forward?
At least in the red zone. I mean, sometimes, and I'll say this as someone who understands the complexities of this game, and I understand a lot of people don't understand the complexity of this game, all this stuff. Sometimes, though, football isn't hard. I would say sometimes football, or most of the times football, really isn't truly hard. But when you have a 6'7" guy who's 200, I said like probably 80 pounds if I had to guess, not even probably 270, who is still a good athlete, can move well enough in space to at least not be a stone out there. And he has, like you said, 100th percentile wingspan. You know, talk about Joey being able to touch you from the other room. Like this guy could probably grab a hold of you and pick you up from the other room. Like it's not that hard. You see that guy and you're like, yeah, I'm going to throw him the ball in the red zone whenever anyone's guarding him who isn't 6'4" or taller. Like it's just not that hard sometimes. And that's what they did. And I think that that's great because they have to find something they can hang their hat on in the red zone, because we've seen how much they've struggled in that area of the field over the past really 3-4 years now. That's something you can hang your hat on to a certain degree. Yeah, like you have Freiermuth, who's been a good red zone target in the past. Pickens, obviously, because of his freakish spectacular catchability, is going to be a threat in the red zone. But when they cover those two, you can't cover Washington with 2 guys in the red zone, because then you're giving up a touchdown to someone else. Like at some point you have to understand your matchups and where you're going to have a weakness in the defense, and how many defenses can handle a 6'7", 280-pound tight end that actually has ball skills and can catch the football in the red zone. I don't know of many personally. Like this was one of those ones where I'm like, okay, cool. They actually did something that makes total sense and that defense cannot do anything about probably. So that was really good to see from Arthur Smith, at least.
Yeah, so credit Arthur Smith for that.
Yes.
I mean, what a brilliant play there. You get him isolated as an outside receiver, essentially,
Awesome.
just toss him the football.
Like, yeah,
so I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that often this year.
Yes.
We'll see if they continue to find ways to get him involved, but Washington's been good. I mean, I went back and watched the game again on Monday morning. I watched the all 22 after that. He is a dominant blocker too this year. And I know that he didn't grade out well last year. It's because of missed assignments. Like he just wasn't all there yet. Yeah. He's taken that big step forward in year 2. And you can see just some of these lanes that he creates as a run blocker, you could drive a truck through them.
Yes.
So if you want to see some of those cut ups, go to my Twitter account at Tommy Jaggi, and you can see the other day I cut those up, some of his run blocking plays there. I'm super impressed with everything that I've seen from him. It's why I was so high on him pre-draft. I don't think he's ever going to be one of these elite receiving tight ends. It's just not his game. He's not Dalton Kincaid that way. He's not smooth and fluid, but he is big and powerful, and he still has soft, natural hands. You can get him the ball every once in a while.
He's a receiving threat. I just think he's not the he's a guy that would be an all-pro tight end in like 2002. You know what I mean? Like that's the best way you can describe a guy like him. Is like this guy would have been considered one of the best players at his position in like 2002, and that's okay because guess what? Our offense is also kind of from 2002 in a lot of ways. So I guess that's a good fit.
Yeah.
But I will say also, I'm pretty sure that if you gave him like a month to gain like 20 pounds, he'd be the second best offensive tackle on the team.
Yeah.
As much as like I hate to say that, but I'm legitimately pretty confident he's a better pass blocker than almost everybody on the team currently.
Shayne, if there's ever a guy to experiment with, right? I mean, it's this guy right here. The Steelers, they've done it before. Granted, it was with a better offensive line coach in Mike Munchak, but you've done it with Villanueva, who was a wide receiver at Army. Wide receiver turned defensive end for the Eagles, turned offensive tackle for the Steelers.
Yeah.
You've done it with a much harder experiment way later in the process, mind you. You've got a young offensive player here that you could develop into a tackle. And I legitimately think he would be good at the position because his strength is remarkable. And if you put some more weight on that guy, there you go. There's problem solved.
I wouldn't be that shocked if he could play tackle today. Like I know he's light for a tackle, no matter how.
Watch him in some of those true pass sets. I mean, he did it. I mean, he was essentially serving as a second offensive tackle in that game, and the guy can hold up. Like I wouldn't say this about anything. I think it's a wild take if you say this about 95% of the tight ends in the league.
Yeah,
but he's that big, strong, and long that he could make it work if the Steelers legitimately wanted to transition him and say, "Hey, we're going to put 30 more pounds on you, and we're going to have you be that guy." Like maybe the guy's already up to 295. Like I don't know. He looks he's big, and that weight is stretched out over a 6'7" frame with really long arms.
Yeah, he looks fine with that weight, but he is definitely big. He's big.
This circles back to the issues that we're having with Broderick Jones. We're going to talk about him in just a second here again. So let's talk about the offensive line, Shayne. Everybody except for Broderick right now. We'll save him for just a second here. What do you make of the rest of this unit? How are they exceeding your expectations over the first 2 weeks of the season?
I think exceeding would be a rough. No, I shouldn't say rough, but just not quite where I'm at with them. I think that Frazier is exceeding my expectations. I think anytime you have a rookie center, it's always kind of a 50-50 of whether they're going to be able to hold up and be able to handle everything that comes with playing the center position. But he's been our best offensive lineman through 2 weeks pretty comfortably. And normally that would be bad, right? If your center who's a rookie is your best offensive lineman. In this case, I do not think that's the case. I think he's been one of the better centers in the league through the first 2 weeks. I think he's been a dominant run blocker a lot of the time. In pass protection, he's held up fine. I think like we saw in week 1, like he did have a couple reps where he was getting bullied a little bit, but he held up long enough to not give up pressure, right? You know, he was one of those lose slowly type of players in college as well that we talked about too. So I think he's been great. I think Anderson has played fine instead of Ciamalo. I didn't think anything too much of him. I don't think he's going to become like, the next guard for this team or anything like that, but he's proven to be a depth player that's usable. And the tackles, we know that there's issues there, right? Like I think Moore's been fine through 2 games, by his standards especially. I thought Fatanu played very well in his reps, and then we know Broderick just is struggling right now as a player.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment with all those guys there. And you look at Dan Moore, it's like, come on, man. Why did it take you for the Steelers to spend 2 first-round picks on tackles before you kicked it in gear? I do think he's been more than competent at the position. Like he's been
good.
Perfectly fine there. But it's like, I wonder how long this is going to continue. And that's something we're going to talk about as well. Spencer Anderson, I think that as good as you could expect a guy that had no game experience before this to come in and he's doing a fine job. Although I do wonder, like later on, if he begins to struggle, will they consider pushing Mason McCormick in there and getting that guy some reps? Because that's the one that I think a lot of us would have liked to seen. He's a left guard by trade. It's what he played through his first summer with the Steelers, and he just has more upside at the position, more strength, more size, all the stuff that you want there. So overall, I'm okay with it. I would give the line like a B. I think it's been a good performance so far, but I agree with you. It hasn't exceeded the expectations that we've set in place. Probably some of them have fallen way short, and that brings us to Broderick. Anything you want to hit on special teams? Any notes from special teams? Corliss Waitman did all right in his first.
We need to go over the defense a little bit here because we don't want to give them.
I'm jumping the ship way too early here. So
we got to give them their flowers. They're the reason we won this game.
That's right.
But since you brought up special teams, Boz is still Boz. He's going to be Boz, and Waitman I thought was fine. I didn't think there was any issues punting the football for the team, so I think he'll be fine enough, right? Like he just needs to hit the ball consistently. It doesn't really matter to me if he booms it that often. I think we just need to consistently get the ball down the field and give the defense not short field, right? Like that's kind of the problem we were having with Percy. So I think that's going to be fine there.
All right, Shayne, let's talk about the defense then. Didn't have a dominant performance in terms of getting after the quarterback and getting him to the ground, but just really sound all around. Like didn't allow the passing game to get going too much. Takeaways help. Obviously, the Steelers have 5 takeaways. They're +5 in the turnover department in the first 2 games, had 2 more takeaways in this contest. Everything that you're wanting to see from the defense, we're basically seeing it. And there are a couple star performers too, like Deshaun Elliott. Like who would have thought through 2 games, Deshaun Elliott would be like one of the best players on the team. He has been amazing. And if you use stats from advanced stats from Pro Football Reference, he's allowed a 0.0 passer rating through 2 games, been targeted 6 times, I believe, 1 reception allowed for 8 yards, and he has an interception. So just don't even throw at that guy. He's been great in run support as well. He's just equally as dominant there. So I am more than impressed with what I've seen from Elliott. Patrick Queen, maybe kind of the opposite there. So I want you to talk about those 2 players, these new additions to the Steelers, and what you've seen from them so far.
Yeah, unfortunately for me and for fans of the team, I was really a fan of Elliott and not so much a fan of Queen, and that has played out. As much as I'm glad Elliott has played very well, Queen, he's looking more like his rookie and second-year version of himself than his all-pro season that he was given last year. Like I think part of it is that and I actually saw a comment earlier about it. We can check the chats later, but we don't have a true nose tackle. We're not really protecting him the way that the Ravens did oftentimes. And also not playing next to Roquan is, I think, impacting him, of course, as well. But he just has been meh for the most part, if not bad at times, right? He had the pass batted down that was kind of thrown right at him, though, so it wasn't really like he really made like a crazy play or anything. He just has kind of been out there. And I expect it to get better slowly over the course of the season. This is a new team, new defense, all that. But this was a player where I was like, I think it's going to be hard for him to live up to his contract because linebackers, generally speaking, unless you're like a top 5 guy, are kind of replaceable for the most part in the modern NFL because of the way that they're attacked in coverage, because of how often it's just really hard to play the position. And I think the other linebackers on the team have been as good, if not better than him. So that's disappointing. But Elliott, though, this is just what happens when a player that is instinctive like he is given a little bit more freedom to play and also given more snaps to play. We saw it in the back half of last year when he had to step in for the Dolphins, but this guy can play. Like when you're like technically like 7th best player on your defense, probably going into the year considered as this playing this well, your defense is really good, right? that's what you have going on. Some of the plays in run defense, especially the play he blew up on 3rd down for the Broncos this week, like it's just instinctful, right? Like when you have a guy that is a good athlete that can see the field well and has instincts to make plays in the backfield and in coverage, having that next to Mink has been so good to see. Like, it's just really nice to see. As good of a job as Terrell Evans was doing with him for the years, like, it was much more of a, like, he's fine, he's there, he's going to play every game. This is a guy who could truly make plays both on the football and in the backfield.
Yeah, we have not seen a secondary like this in a while, I think, Shayne. Let's transition it over to the cornerbacks now. Yeah. Joey Porter, Dante Jackson, Corey Trice getting involved with that interception there. Yeah. Always been a huge Corey Trice fan. I was a believer in the talent, and I thought if he was truly given the opportunity that he could make some things happen. And I think that he's already performing pretty well. Dante Jackson's been kind of sneaky good. I feel like in terms of getting his hands on the football, he's broken up some passes. So who would have thought the Steelers would be winning that trade right now? Like Deontay Johnson just looks miserable, but that's maybe a Bryce Young problem over there. Jackson is who he is. I think he's gonna be fine. Porter's still that lockdown guy, but man, he's got to clean up the grabby.
That's what's killing him still.
So often for penalties. Now I did cut up the one that illegal hands the face. Didn't look like there was anything there.
No, that was weird
on that one.
Whatever,
but there's been other really sloppy reps where the grabbiness is just too much. It's over the top. You can't get away with that stuff, at least not right now. You get away with it often just because of his natural style of play. But you're still getting called too often for these plays. And I like that he's shutting these receivers down. And in week 1, he gave up 1 reception for 7 yards to Drake London. This past week, he gave up, I gotta remember the exact number, but it wasn't the 26-yarder from Sutton. Was that on him? Yeah, that
was on him. He held on the play and then,
So yes, and that was an ugly rep from Porter there for sure, but definitely has to clean up the grabbiness there.
Yeah, I mean, Porter, we know what his game is. Like, there's going to be some weeks probably where he just has not like a rough game in coverage per se, but she's going to get you a couple penalties that can definitely kind of keep drives going when they maybe wouldn't have otherwise. But we haven't had a player be able to play coverage the way he has in a long time, so I'll take it. Like you said, Jackson has been overall good for number 2 corner. I think he's lived up to that billing, and that was another guy I was worried about just because the downward trend, guy that relies on a lot of athleticism, getting a little bit older. You worry about that type. So far, so good. I think he's been fine. And then Trice is the guy where it's like, all right, at some point he's got to play more, right? Like the interception, obviously Nick's made a bad read. He didn't expect him to be sitting on that. He thought Sutton was going to clear and get that touchdown, but he was in the right spot. He made the play. He's been really good in coverage when he has played, especially in the preseason. We saw him do very well. I think it's translated so far in the limited snaps he's gotten, and I think we need to see more of him almost regardless of how Jackson plays. Like, I think you need to start making that transition slowly to where they kind of both are out there at different times, maybe matchup dependent. You have bigger receivers. I definitely want Trice on, like something like that. But in general, the corners have held up very well through 2 games.
Yeah, 100%. And anybody complaining about the cornerback position right now in general, go put on the tape from several years back when it's like William Gay is your best corner out there, and you got nobody that can cover man to man. And so I will take my lumps with Joey Porter. He can grab if he wants to keep getting. He averages a penalty a game the rest of the way. Whatever, if it prevents the other team's top receiver from getting the ball and getting it frequently, that's what it's all about. It's what you have to be able to do. Now, there are some scary matchups coming up. I'm really interested to see how it's going to like going into CD. Is he going to play the slot against CD? How are they going to how are they going to do that when the Steelers play the Cowboys? There are some things that are really concerning that I don't think that he favors very well in that doesn't fit his play style. But we will cross that bridge when we come to it. Overall, very pleased with the secondary, pleased with the defense. Overall, it's just been a strong performance. The Steelers are giving up 8 points a game through the first 2 weeks of the season, and they have 5 takeaways. So we would gladly take that. Yeah. Shayne, anything else you want to get to before we move to Broderick here?
No, I think special teams we kind of touched on a little bit. I think it's time to have the conversation about Broderick here.
All right. Okay. If you are a fan of Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Steel Curtain Podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain Podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. If you like listening to us, go tell your friends about the show as well. Yes, we'd like to get as many ears on it as possible. All right, Shayne, the Broderick Jones dilemma. And it is a dilemma. It is quite the predicament we are in here. You traded up to the 14th overall pick in the 2023 NFL draft with the intention of drafting your future left tackle. It's how the Steelers have described him from day one. It's how Omar Khan continues to describe him. This is our left tackle of the future. doesn't look like he's your left tackle of the future. It looks like he's your right tackle that you just benched because he had 3 penalties in the game. I'm super frustrated with everybody. I'm not pointing the finger at one person. Broderick's got to step it up. When you get these opportunities, you have to show that you can play, whether it's out of position, in position. You can't have 3 penalties in a game, and you have to show that you are that guy that they drafted. At the same time, we can take this all the way back to a Mike Tomlin decision and say, why would you draft this guy if you are not going to start him a single game at left tackle through his first 2 seasons here? A single game at left tackle. You force him to be a right tackle because Dan Moore didn't want to play left tackle, the guy that you tried to replace him with. But because Dan Moore didn't want to do it, you didn't make the switch. There's so many fingers to point here, Shayne, but I feel like the results are the results, and it's so hard to argue against them. Yes, there were a few encouraging signs, and I even cut some of those up on film. There was one run block play in particular where Broderick just
road graded,
crushed his guy, just threw him into another dimension, and it resulted in a huge run from Najee Harris. But you have to be able to play and play more consistently, and we're just not seeing that with Broderick. What is the right move here? Like, what do you do if you're the Steelers?
I think at this point, the right move, if you want to have a chance at this working out, there's 2 options I see for how you handle it. One is you go to Dan Moore, and regardless of what dirt he may have on the organization, as we like to joke about, or whatever it is, you tell him, I know you're playing well. Maybe we consider trading you to a team that needs left tackle, something like that, but you're not going to play anymore. Jones is going to play every snap at left tackle until he can't or he's hurt, because we need to find out if he's good. They're not going to do that because they obviously, if they thought he was the best option, he'd be out there. But that's what you should do when you have a first-round pick that you need to find the answer to, whether he's good or not. We just saw a quarterback pick taken at 1 who now isn't playing football for you anymore for the Panthers. Like, at some point, you have to find out if the guy is good. And then from there, you can make your decision from there. And I know he's played enough to say, like, well, he hasn't been great. You need to see him play his position for longer than, a couple snaps here and there, right? Like, you have to see him play his position that he was drafted to play until he proves he can't do it. If you're not going to do that, I think the next best option is to either sit him entirely and work on him being a left tackle until he's fully ready to go. Do not rep him at right tackle at all. Put him right back on the left and work on it until he feels like he can go out there and play. Or try him at guard at this point. Anderson's been fine, but maybe Jones, because of his athleticism as a guard and compared to most guards, because he is a shorter tackle, although he's longer, maybe he plays better as a left guard. Maybe that's just what his position should be, right? We're not sure about that, obviously, going into the season. I didn't have an expectation of that happening, but that might be the best way to get him on the field where he probably won't be as much of a liability when he is playing poorly, right? I think it's one of those 2, and unfortunately, neither of those 2 are going to be what happens.
No, what's going to happen is Dan Moore is going to be out there for a long time until I think it would take several games of him struggling in a row to maybe make that switch again. Bowtown is going to be the right tackle, which leaves Broderick Jones on the bench. I don't disagree with you, Shayne. I think that that's what you have to do. Now, listen, Broderick played, if I recall, he played left tackle for half a game last year against the Ravens, and he looked pretty good. He looked encouraging there.
Yeah.
And then when Tomlin decided to bench a core for supposed disciplinary reasons, Broderick became a right tackle and has never looked back. That's been his position from the second half of the season all the way until now, even during training camp. I mean, most of these reps at training camp and the preseason, almost all of them in the preseason, came as a right tackle. Why do you say that you draft this guy to play left tackle and play him at right tackle? It is hard to make sense of. And so I agree. What I would do is I would sit Dan Moore and I would say, Broderick, we're going to put you on like a 3 or 4 game leash. You're going to give it everything you have, and you are going to ball out every single rep. And you show us that you're the tackle of this team. And if you can't do that, we're going to have a conversation, and it's going to be a difficult one. But what you can't do, Shayne, now the difference between like Broderick in like a Bryce Young situation, we've seen an entire year of Bryce Young being the worst quarterback in the league. And we saw two games this season of Bryce Young being the worst quarterback in the league.
And worse comparably so. Year. Like actually
Bryce Young, yes. And even this year, Bryce Young was benched after converting 1 of 20 plays on third down, 1 of 20 plays on third. So there's a reason that number 1 pick is draft.
Yeah.
Broderick, though, have we truly seen enough to say this guy is done and doesn't deserve that chance again? I want to see it at least. I don't care if he looks like Dan Moore did as a rookie. I need to see him out there and see and know that your investment is at least getting the opportunity to play the position he was drafted to play. I don't think that's all the problem. I think half the problem lies with Broderick, and maybe he's not good. But I feel like the fail-safe, Shayne, is let's make you a guard then. If we tried you here, we tried you there, let's make you a guard, and maybe you can be a really good guard. We've seen it happen to guys in the past. Name's escaping me. I can think of who he was. Giants guy that they drafted, went to Washington. Eric Flowers.
Right, Flowers,
Other guys that have made the transition, just didn't cut it at tackle, but it did play pretty well at guard. Maybe that's his career route. I hate to go that way already because guards just aren't as valuable as tackles. They're not a fraction as valuable as tackles. Tackles are so much harder to find than guards. But if it worse comes to worse and you have to do that, so be it. At least give the guy an opportunity. He has not started and played 1 full game at right tackle. He needs that opportunity to see what you have in him. The results haven't been good. But part of the reason why he was so bad this last game, it wasn't just a performance. It was the penalty thing. It was the penalties. He had
he's in his head.
He had the false start, threw his hands up like he didn't know what the snap count was. The holding call was kind of
ticky-tack. It was. It wasn't.
So I don't blame him a lot for that. And to his credit, Fields rolled out on that play. He didn't know Fields was coming over there.
And he did try to
would have let go sooner.
Yeah, he tried to lay off once you realized.
So I don't fault him too much for the penalty there. But again, 3 penalties in the game is something you never want to see from an offensive lineman. He's got so much to clean up. Like, Shayne, did the Steelers need a new offensive line coach? Like, where do you go? I don't want to say already that I missed on this evaluation. Like, the player that I watched in college looks cleaner than the one I'm watching right now. Like, what has happened to Broderick Jones?
I think the offensive line coaching is certainly subpar for the NFL. I really do. I think Meyer's not done a good job with a lot of these guys, because you look at the 2 players that are young players this year that are rookies that are playing well so far in limited snaps. They are players who kind of were billed as like ready to go out the box players. Frazier was built like that. Fatanu was built like that. These aren't guys that are these developmental upside players. They are guys who could be really great players already, or at least could become great players at their positions. But it's not because they have this huge ceiling that they need to go reach. It's because they're already very good and have enough talent to elevate themselves as they get older. Jones was a developmental tackle at the end of the day. Yeah, he looked really good in college. He had a lot of dominant reps, but it's at college, right? Like, the reason for that is because of how athletic he is as a player, because of how long he is, despite not being a super tall tackle. Like, he had all these physical advantages, and you had to take advantage of them in the NFL and coach him up. They haven't done that, on top of not telling him what position he's going to play, basically, at this point. And another thing we should talk about is, like, I mentioned, like, either sitting him at left tackle and letting him figure it out or not, or the guard thing. Why not just put Fatanu at his position? He's also probably supposed to play left tackle, and let Broderick just play the string at right tackle at this point. Because Dan Moore, for some reason, is like the best player on the team, according to Mike Tomlin in some ways. But that's the other frustrating thing is, like, okay, fine, you think he's a right tackle? Play him there, and let the other first-round pick tackle you have that also played left tackle in college, play him at left tackle. Like, I just don't know how they've managed to mess up 2 tackle picks, potentially. Fatanu, I think, will be fine at right. But, like, they have potentially set themselves up where they've spent 2 first-round picks on tackles who aren't playing the spots they're supposed to play, and one of whom may not play at all.
Yeah, Shayne, and I think the problem, again, it comes back to philosophy. It comes back to Mike Tomlin is so present-minded. He is so focused on the here and now. He doesn't care what happens in 2025. He wants to win now. And I understand that the Steelers, they need to start winning playoff games. You can't have 8 years in a row without a playoff win. But because you're always so focused in the present, you sometimes don't do what's best for your future. And I think that this is what got them plateauing in the first place.
Yes.
So the fact that you've seen some of these things play out and you haven't gotten better, maybe you should try to do what's in the best interest of the guy that you was supposed to be this cornerstone piece of your offensive line. And again, people, they miss on draft picks sometimes. Maybe he's just one of those. Maybe that's what he is. But you're not going to know until you play him and find out. You compare him to Dan Moore. Moore has had 3.5 years to prove that he's that guy. I mean, he's going into his 4th season, final year of his contract. So even if Moore does play well, let's say he plays baseline level of a left tackle in the NFL, now you have to go and turn around and pay him if you don't trust Broderick Jones. It's almost a lose-lose situation. Not only did you start this guy for 3 years of really bad play, when he finally got it in year 4, is like a Bud Dupree thing. When he finally got it, you got to make a decision on if you're going to pay this guy. And so if they pay him, not only did you burn a first and third round pick on Broderick Jones, you got 3 bad years of Moore, and you're now paying him a big contract. If he turns out great, that's fine. But you are not going to know who Broderick is if you don't put him in that spot. And so I think the philosophy is wrong. Play these guys, find out what they have, and you'll know this year. Like, I think with Broderick, even though he's incredibly raw, by the end of the season, if he has not progressed at all by the end of the season, you're going to know. The problem with that is Tomlin's going to say, I'm not going to put anybody out there who's going to jeopardize my chances of maybe swinging a game one way or the other. And when are you going to play then? When are you going to play Broderick? Because he didn't play left tackle in the preseason. When are you going to put him there and see what you have in him? Because other than what you think you have, you just don't know.
Yeah, and as great of an organization the Steelers have been throughout the years, this is one of the few things where pretty much everybody across the league would come in together and say, like, this is just not how you handle player development when it comes to offensive line in particular. But somebody that was raw coming out, somebody that needed reps, that needed the time to play. And again, like, we know his philosophy is that every game is the only thing that matters. That game that week is the only thing that matters, right? Yeah. And I understand that's why he's been able to win so many games in his career. It's why he's never had a losing season. But at some point, you have to trust your talent evaluation ability. You have to trust your GM who took this player, that he's going to work out if you give him the time. And frankly, in an offense like this, your left tackle probably can be terrible, and you'll be able to figure it out. You have a running quarterback. You have a quarterback that's going to be able to escape pressure, who's been used to escaping pressure his entire career. Let him go figure it out. And if the offense is truly unplayable at that point, like if he's making the offense impossible to play, then fine, you can bench him because he's shown you that, right? You haven't given him a chance to show that he's truly that bad. He might not be good, and that's what we keep saying is, like, we don't actually know the full answer to that question, especially at left tackle, which is what he's supposed to be. So until they show us that, we're going to keep harping on it, because it's one of the biggest question marks of this team is how in the world have they managed to mess up a tackle pick when the simple answer is just to play the tackle that was drafted in the first round over the guy who was drafted in the fourth round. Like, this is not very hard things to do. I don't know.
And the irony of it is kind of wild, Shayne, because you played and started Dan Moore every game for 3 years when he was performing poorly. He was not
the vast
doing
majority
a good
of the
job
time
at all. And now you finally draft. You invest. You spend 5 times as much investment to get this guy rather than your mid 4th round pick in 2021, and you're not playing him. It's a bizarre situation. And here's one thought that I don't know if I've never heard anybody else talk about it this way.
Okay.
But I wonder if you look at it through the ends of Andy Weidel and Omar Khan, the guys who are responsible for drafting Broderick Jones. Do you think that they're frustrated that Tomlin is it? Because that's a bad look on their part. Yeah. Like they've had a good reputation overall, very good. But it's a bad look on their part to say, we spent a 1st round and a 3rd round pick combined. You traded the 3rd to go up from 17 to 14 to get Jones.
Yeah.
And this guy right now it's looking like a bust, and that's falling back on us. Like, do you think that they have to be frustrated the fact that Tomlin is not playing him at left tackle and not giving him that opportunity to show that he could potentially be that player?
I mean, I think they have to be, right? Like, whether they're willing to say it or not, I think they have to be frustrated because, again, like, not playing the 14th overall pick a tackle whenever he hasn't proven that he's definitely bad. Yeah, that he's definitely not good enough. Because again, it's one thing to not play great as a rookie or something like that, especially as an offensive tackle. Most offensive tackles, if you're Joe Alt, you're great right away, right? Like that's kind of like it's other than that, it's like not very often, right? Like, Rashawn Slater, ironically, also a Charger, like also does that. But like you look at a guy like Andrew Thomas for the Giants, horrendous as a rookie, just terrible. There's not 5 better tackles in the NFL right now than him, right? And that's kind of the point is when you have a guy that is also from Georgia, by the way, a freak that is just needs time to figure it out, they often will. And he hasn't been given the leash necessary to prove that, especially, again, at left tackle. We keep harping on that. At right tackle, maybe he's not good. At left tackle, we have no idea how good he is ultimately, even now, like today, let alone in the future if he gets time. You have to play the players that you invested time, effort, money, draft picks in. And if you aren't willing to do that for the sake of, oh, he might not be good. Dan Moore's not good either, Mike. I'm sorry. He's played well to start the year, but there's 3 years of evidence of him not being a quality NFL tackle. And for some reason, it's okay to play him, though. That's the most frustrating thing. It'd be different if they had a veteran in place that they expected to fall off and he's still kicking and he's still playing great. That's not the case here. There's nothing realistic. Like, no one in the world is going to go to Mike Tomlin. Like, I can't believe you benched Dan Moore for your first-round pick. Nobody on the planet. I'm sorry. It maybe Dan Moore's parents or something. I don't know. Other than that, like, that's the only people on the planet who would be mad at him for doing this. So that's what's really frustrating is, where is this decision actually coming from? Is it truly just the fear of him being bad? Because you're already bad there. I don't know.
Yeah. And like you said, Shayne, it could be a case where Jones isn't good. But every Steelers fan everywhere has a right to be frustrated with how Mike Tomlin and the team have butchered this situation. Like, you have not given him that opportunity to supplant the player that you meant to supplant in the first place, because he was not good. It's why you spend a first-round pick on him, and to play the position you were drafted to play. Like, it's really as simple as that. Until we see him there, and until we see a stretch of games with him starting at left tackle and see how it goes, it's so hard to speak on this guy that we knew was incredibly raw, A+ talent, tools wise, but incredibly raw. And so the rawness, it's not going to help when you're flip-flopping sides, when you're asked to do things that you normally, when you're rotating tackles in.
Yeah, that's also honestly, just a straight up.
You bring him off the bench and just throw him into the game at tackle. It's like, what are you doing? If you want to write a master class on how to ruin a developmental offensive tackle, ask Mike Tomlin. It'll help you get started.
The last thing I'll say on this before, because we want to get to our game preview and stuff. It is such an unserious thing to do as an NFL team to rotate tackles in a live NFL regular season game. You cannot give me any excuse for that. It is horrendous coaching, in my opinion, to rotate tackles when, what does everybody say about offensive line play? You could have 5 offensive linemen who are all not that great, but if they play every snap together, if they get continuity, you're probably going to be pretty good. How do you get continuity when the tackle next to you is different every other drive? Like, what? It just doesn't make any sense. You can get away with it, I guess, against the Broncos because they're not good. But like, if they do this again against the Chargers, who have edge rush talent, if they do it against almost any other football team except for the Broncos, they're going to get destroyed when they do that. Like, that's what's going to happen. And I can't make any heads or tails of it. So.
Yeah. And I think what's going to happen, like we said, is Dan Moore is going to be the left tackle. Fowtown is going to be the right tackle. Yes. Broderick Jones is going to sit the bench a while. And it might take an injury, or it might take really poor play from Dan Moore to finally make that switch. I feel bad about the way the situation's been handled. Yeah. Hopefully he takes this the right way as a big lesson. Like, when next time I get an opportunity, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to give it everything I've got, and they're going to be pleased with the selection. So I don't want to say we're not going to get into that. We're not even going to get into the bust conversation yet. We're going to give it more time to play out. But things are not looking encouraging so far, for sure. The way that this is
I just hope that this doesn't become a Kevin Dotson situation.
Yeah. I mean, I can see something like that. Like,
it really feels
It did. And Dotson went to the Rams and was a really good guard the next season. So is it on the Steelers? Is it on the coaching? Is it on whatever? It's just, there's so many different ways you could look at this to say and to see how it was mishandled, that it's really frustrating. The more you talk about it, the more frustrated you get, because you need your first round picks to work out, especially ones that just have all the talent like that, and you're just not seeing the results. All right, Shayne, it's time to move on. If you guys have any thoughts or questions about the Broderick Jones dilemma here, drop them in the chat, and Shayne and I will see if we can get to those before we close off here. But Steelers Chargers week 3 preview. I knew this one was going to be close, Shayne, in terms of the odds starting the game here. The Steelers are 1.5-point favorites according to DraftKings Sportsbook. That means on a neutral playing field, they would actually be underdogs in this game against the Chargers. Are you okay with the way that the line was set here?
I am. Because you look at the way the Chargers have played football through 2 games, it's kind of a heightened version of what the Steelers have accomplished, right? Their offense has been more productive, and their defense has been just as good and productive. Now, granted, as bad as the Broncos offense is, the Panthers offense is somehow tiers worse, especially when Bryce Young was playing for them. Right now,
Yes.
moving forward, it may be a harder task to beat the Panthers with Andy Dalton starting, which sounds insane in 2024, but I do think it's true. In general, they're very mirror images of each other, right? In the sense of like what they're trying to do offensively for the most part. Their defense is very sound, very smart, plays well. Now, Charger defense much less talented overall, in my opinion, especially in the secondary, but they're getting a lot out of those guys because of the scheme. Steelers, on the other hand, much more player dependent instead of scheme dependent. So there's still differences there, but I think the Chargers also have, at the end of the day, they have a super weapon at quarterback that they haven't really implemented yet because I don't know who their third receiver is if anyone gets hurt. Like, and I know the top three receivers in probably every NFL team right now because I'm a sicko. But like if one injury happens, I don't know who's playing for them, right? Like the three they have playing are also very either young, inconsistent, or Quentin Johnston, who is great one week and probably this week he'll catch 0 passes. But they have that added benefit of like they do have Justin Herbert back there, right? He has the potential at any moment to just strike for 70 yards because of his ability. So I think it's fair to have them as a tick up from the Steelers, despite them both being 2-0 so far.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, Shayne, you mentioned Herbert. The last time the Steelers played against Herbert was in 2021. He had 393 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, 116 pass rating, 9.3 yards per attempt, and the Chargers scored 41 points on their own turf. So things did not go well. Last time, obviously, different team, different roster this time around.
Much different,
and that's not been their MO so far. Nope. I mean, it's all been about the running game, not about the passing game. In fact, Herbert's numbers very similar to Fields' numbers through the first 2 weeks. Both of these teams are 2-0. Neither of these quarterbacks have thrown for like 150 plus yards so far in each of their first 2 games. So very modest numbers in terms of passing. And Herbert's only averaging 6 yards an attempt right now, 6 yards an attempt. And Fields is at like 6.6, I believe. So their numbers are almost identical from a passing standpoint. Where they're suddenly scary, Shayne, is this Chargers team is running the daylights out of the football. And just numbers, get this for a second. If you've not heard this yet, you've got to see this now. J.K. Dobbins, who is back with Greg Roman now, right? Greg Roman's
familiar. We're familiar, of course.
Yes. So back with Greg Roman now in L.A. In his first 2 games of the season, Dobbins has 266 rushing yards and is averaging 9.9 yards per attempt. He's averaging a first down per rush, essentially 9.9 yards per rush attempt. I've got the next gen stats here as well. I had that. Can't remember where it is right now. In terms of the next gen, it's right here. Let me see. Yes. Next gen stats, rushing yards over expected. So what they're getting, what they're expected to get. J.K. Dobbins is plus 139 yards over expected. The next highest on the list is Josh Jacobs at plus 62 yards. So their running game has been absolutely firing. It's the reason why the Chargers are 2-0 right now, that and combined with their defense performing well. Do you think the Steelers can match up this way, Shayne? How do you think that this game is going to go that in terms of stopping this rushing attack?
Well, I hesitate to believe that they're going to average, or he's going to average 10 yards a carry against the Steelers. I feel like that's probably not going to happen. However, I will say with Dobbins, he's very much, especially in the first 2 weeks, a lot of those yards are on the big explosive runs where he breaks out and there's no one to get him, right? Mm-hmm. And I will say with him, first of all, very happy for a guy that's had the injury history he's had to be playing so well to start the year. Regardless of the Ravens history, all that stuff, can't be upset about a guy getting this opportunity, at a point when a lot of running backs should just be done, right? Like having that many injuries, everything else. I do expect that he's not going to play, even let's say he's not going to average half as many yards as he currently is throughout the full season, probably. Not because he isn't good, but because it's impossible to average that many yards per attempt throughout the full season. But I think specifically against the Steelers, I think that they're not going to allow the big run plays. You look at Bijan Robinson with Atlanta in week 1. He was almost breaking plays, but they would always, at the last second, get him down. And I think that's kind of what the Steelers' run defense is outside of the plays that are made up front occasionally by T.J. Watt and Cam Hayward. Like when you don't get those plays right at the line of scrimmage, they do swarm tackle. They cut off pursuit angles. They allow themselves to at least like hone in the run plays that from getting big explosive gains, right? That's where it's going to be different for the Chargers this week, where I don't think they're going to get those explosives nearly as often, or when they do get them, it won't be 50 yards. It might be 25 yards, 20 yards. I think they're still going to run the ball really well. I do think this defense is going to have to really sell out against the run a lot, which could open you up to Justin Herbert throwing you down the field. With these receivers, though, I'd much rather take that risk than letting J.K. Dobbins loose right now. So in general, I expect it to be much more like a realistic, healthy yards per carry perhaps for him, but also the explosive plays I don't expect to be as big of a deal.
Yeah, and you would hope that they would be more disciplined than like the Carolina Panthers were.
Yeah, who have nobody out there right now. Like they're, I mean, Derek Brown being out is basically making them the worst team in the NFL on both sides of the ball potentially. It's just not great.
Yeah, his loss was huge. Yeah. But you even look at the game though. You look at the Raiders game. I mean, in that game, he averaged 13.5 yards a carry, and the Raiders have a good defense, and so
he just broke off those long runs again. Which, like, if he does it every week, good for him. I'll throw up my hands and say, good luck on your 2,000-yard season then. Like, you know what I'm saying? But, like, realistically, it's just probably not.
Definitely has to be a point of emphasis for sure this week. Make sure that they don't beat you that way. Let's talk about injuries here for a second. Nothing too notable other than the ones we already know. Russell Wilson's not playing. Matakavich, Skoranek are out. Nothing big for the Steelers. Hopefully Roman Wilson can return. The practice report, I have not seen today's practice report as we're live here right now. I'd love for him to get back on the field. For the Chargers, though, Justin Herbert got rolled up on his right leg in the third quarter of week 2. He was able to come back in. He finished out the game. Herbert's going to play. There's no doubt in my mind he's going to play. But could he be hobbled a little bit? Maybe he's got the x-rays came back negative, so he doesn't have a break. But maybe he's got an ankle sprain, something that could limit his mobility a little bit to give the Steelers a slight edge there. Though we talk about those tackles and just how good they are at protecting anyway. That's the biggest injury to note, Shayne. Do you think that's going to affect the game in any way?
I think it's going to probably eliminate some of the design run stuff they were doing with him last week, where like they were starting to use him in Greg Roman's scheme, which, by the way, I will say, I know it's working out so far. The Chargers hiring Greg Roman is objectively hilarious to me. Just because you have this super weapon at quarterback in terms of throwing the football down the field, and then you give him Greg Roman and this receiving core, and like if it works, it's great. But it does kind of feel like you have a hot rod and you're going like 20 miles an hour down the road. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of what this feels. Which again, like it's working through 2 weeks. It might work this week. I don't want to discredit it, but like it does just feel weird to me. But I do think it could limit that part of the game plan where they will, because he is a good athlete. Like he runs well when he's done it. He just doesn't do it very much, obviously. But I think that part of the game is probably going to be not there for them as much, I would imagine.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so either. And for what it's worth, these two defenses, it's only 2 games into the season. The Steelers are allowing 8 points a game. The Chargers are allowing 6.5 points a game. The top 2 scoring defenses in the league right now. Obviously, I would think it especially, well, for both teams. Yeah. The Broncos aren't going to score a lot of points this year. Neither are the Panthers, who the Chargers just played. So that definitely factors into this at all.
Yeah.
But the Chargers' defense is playing much better now that Jim Harbaugh is here. Like they had talent on their roster before. They still have holes. They've got some gaps, like you said, in the secondary. But their defensive line looks good. I mean, they've been really strong through the first couple of games here. So they're kind of, in some ways, they're kind of mirror images of each other, at least how they've played entering week 3 so far. So let's talk about some of these specific matchups to watch in this game, Shayne. And I point straight to the offensive tackles of the Chargers against the edge rushers of the Steelers. I think that's going to be a really pivotal. I think this could swing the game because you have potentially, by the end of the season, we could be talking about Chargers having the best pair of tackles in the NFL. Rashawn Slater, amazing football player. And then at right tackle, you've got Joe Alt. He has been everything that everybody could have expected him to be in his first 2 games. Watt's going to be going against Alt and Highsmith against Slater. Which one of these guys can get the edge? Can either of them get the edge? And if you don't get the edge, you're going to give Justin Herbert time to sit in the pocket and find receivers down the field. So how do you see this matchup playing out? Who do you think this matchup favors? You're talking about great offensive tackles versus one of the best pair of edge rushers.
I do think, obviously, it's really hard not to still favor the Steelers by a little bit. because as good as Alt has been, he is still a rookie tackle, right? Like it's really hard to expect him to win against TJ Watt consistently every single snap. Like Watt's going to eventually get his. Highsmith also, because of his play style, like Slater is more the technician, he's a good athlete, but he's not this, amazing, unbelievable athlete. I think he also has the chance to get him a couple times because of his speed. That spin move, obviously, is probably going to try to break that out a couple times. Like, I think the edge still goes to the Steelers slightly, but this is one of those matchups that could easily go the other way. A lot of the time, that's not the case. Like you said, this is probably going to be by the end of the season if Alt plays the way he's played, considered, if not the best, one of the best tackle duos. You look at teams like the Eagles with Mailata and Lane Johnson, like guys like that's hard to kind of live up to that standard, but that's what they've been through 2 games, right? And like obviously this is the first like real test because the Raiders had Crosby but not much else, so you'll see kind of how really good they are this week, I think. But going into the game, you have to at least give a slight edge to the Steelers still.
Yeah, and you talked about going against a rookie and Joe Alt, and I think leverage is going to be the key here. Alt 6'8.25". I would try to get Herbig on that side,
yes,
a handful of times in pass rush situations to see if he can just dip that edge and get a quick pressure on Herbert. I think if you can do what the Steelers do and get one of those strip sacks, something like that, that could be the difference in this game. Like it's probably going to be a low scoring game. Point total set at 35.5. Considering both of these teams, I would hammer the under, honestly.
Oh,
they've been way under. Both these teams have been under.
That might be 5 points too much.
it is. We'll talk about our predictions here in a second. But yeah, I would try to get Herbig isolated against a tall tackle who doesn't necessarily have really long arms, but he's really big and really tall. So see if you can exploit that matchup. Watt's got to get underneath his shoulder pads with that dip and rip move he's so good at. So I do think this one could go either way, but I agree with you. I'd probably give the edge to the Steelers. They're going to make 1 or 2 of those plays that could be splashy enough where it's like, this is a drive killer. You force Herbert into a bad pass or you get a strip sack. That's still possible. As good as these offensive tackles are, we've seen the Steelers beat up on good offensive tackles because they've got really good edge rushers there. Let's talk about the wide receivers in this game. Is Porter going to follow anybody, do you think, here? Because this, to me, you got like 3 receivers who right now at least are all kind of on par with each other. Is he just going to stick at left cornerback, or do you think he follows anybody?
I guess that he's going to follow Johnston just because he's the best athlete of the 3.
Yeah.
Like that's just my guess because he did have a good game against the Panthers. He's been really bad to start his career, like outside of this past game for the most part. But I think that just because of the athletic and the size of him too, that makes the most sense. But I also kind of expect him to probably just kind of stay on his side most of the time because none of these guys are like you have to travel with them. It's more so if you're playing matchups, you probably want the like a guy like Porter on Johnston who's taller, longer, athletic. Like, and then Dante Jackson against McConkey would be interesting. Just because I don't know what you do with McConkey personally because like none of our corners are exactly like the shifty like you Bishop, but he's been he's a undrafted free agent. Like it's probably hard to ask him to do that. But like McConkey is the one I'm most worried about because like those kind of guys are who the Steelers really struggle against, who can separate very quickly, who can play in the slot, who can do that stuff. Like that's where they really struggle. So that's more what I'm curious about. But I don't think Porter is going to get McConkey personally.
Yeah, and McConkey, I worry about him. If Bishop gets matched up against him, Bishop's been a good tackler these first 2 games. I don't think he's been particularly good in coverage. I think you could exploit him. And I was talking to somebody on the phone the other day. That's what I said. That is that one weakness that I still worry about in Pittsburgh's pass defense is wherever Beanie Bishop is, probably be a good idea for quarterbacks to look that direction, considering how strong everybody else has been in the secondary and how kind of unreliable he's been at times. Just this last game, allowed a couple of receptions where he kind of took a bad angle to the ball a little bit late there, and then he doesn't break down to make the play, and so there's big yak happening afterwards as well. That would be where I would look to exploit if I was the Chargers offense here, but that one worries me a little bit as well. Is there any other matchups that you wanted to get to, Shayne?
Yeah, I think the biggest one actually because of the potential of the tackles really holding up well. The interior pass rush for the Steelers, I think, is going to be much more important because Herbert, especially, like you guys that are the bigger, taller quarterbacks that want to stand in the pocket and throw down the field, like interior pressure destroys those guys a lot, right? Like it really messes with their ability to play. And you look at the way Ogunjobi and Benton have played, and not even talking about Cam Hayward as a pass rusher, who's been actually, believe it or not, has the most pressures on this team currently as a pass rusher. It's going to be a load for them to handle. Their interior is much weaker than their exterior to like offensive line. So I think that's the most important matchup from a pass rushing perspective, but also defensively. Like if you're going to beat this team, you're going to have to stop the run. And guess who's going to be at the forefront of that? The interior defensive line. Like they have to play very well in this game. They have to play up to their potential, which with Hayward playing the way he is, Ben as pass rusher, like that means they could potentially shut down this running game if they play to their best.
Yeah, there's no doubt that matchup favors Pittsburgh when it comes to
for sure
line versus the interior of the Chargers. And I would say with that, Shane, when it comes to stopping the run, Patrick Queen's got to tackle better.
Yes.
Their linebackers can't be missing tackles. And so you got to get in there.
Big thing too.
Seeing that fast. Don't let Dobbins get the edge on you where he can explode out in the open field. So,
I think we see a lot more Elliott close to the line too this week as well. Especially with the lack of receiving weapons. I think that we'll see him there a lot more. And for what it's worth, in talking about the run defense against the Chargers, despite the history of this this team for PFF, the top-rated interior run defender and edge rusher, at least for guys who played at least half the snaps of like the highest amount of snaps for run defense, both is Watt and Hayward. They are the highest rated run defenders at their positions so far through 2 games. So if there was going to be weak, the Chargers don't run all over the field. This hopefully will be it. So we'll have to see if that plays out.
Yep, and I think that's the plan you need to execute. When Greg Roman is your offensive coordinator, he wants to run the football, make them pass the ball. Herbert is good. I mean, Herbert is a good quarterback, but the receivers are unproven. And the Steelers, I really like the matchup overall, the secondary against the passing game of the Chargers. And so you need to force them into those situations. Then hopefully you can tee off, get a few sacks, get an interception, that kind of stuff that can shift the tide in this game. So Shane, let's talk about our game predictions. And I have a feeling this is not going to be the 41 to 37 game that we saw in 2021, the last time these two teams played in the regular season. So go ahead and give us your game prediction and a score for week 3.
So I do have the Steelers winning. I do think that they can take care of the Chargers with especially like Herbert being a little bit hobbled, possibly the passing game not being as much of a threat as it normally would be with the Justin Herbert-led offense with the way they're doing things. I have them winning 17-14. I think that it's closer to the over than it was last week, but still slightly under. I think that the Steelers offense can get a couple touchdowns this week, bring that total up to the same amount of games they've played at 3, try to get there, a couple plays. And I think that my vision is it's a tied game late. Steelers get the ball. They find a way to get into field goal range, which for Boz is pretty much after the 50-yard line, and they kick something to win the game. So,
okay. I'm real close to you. I've got the Steelers 16-14 because I think they're only going to score 1 touchdown. They're going to get down in field goal range.
Fair.
So that's my logic here. Again, both of us way under the point total for this week. And again, it's the Steelers. You should always, if you're going to bet the point total, you got to go under. But I would be surprised if this turned out. If both teams scored in the 20s, let me say I'd be really shocked.
Yes, if 40 points are scored in this game total, that would be a huge upset. This is kind of where we're at with it. Which now that we're saying that, it's going to be like 50-42 or something.
Watch it, watch it. I'll gladly accept that.
There's like 6 defensive touchdowns, 4 punt returns. Like if something stupid happens, it's like I don't know, but.
Knowing the Steelers, knowing how they want what brand of football they want to play, and seeing how the first 2 weeks have gone, like their thing is defense. Like they specialize in that area, and so I'm hoping that they can hold out for another win, make it 3 straight, and then it'll be sitting pretty above the division there. We'll see what happens with the rest of the AFC North right now, but obviously the Bengals 0-2, Ravens 0-2, Browns 1-1. Boy, if you can keep climbing in those division ranks. I know these games haven't been particularly meaningful because you haven't played each other so far, and teams have played out of conference games. So it's going to be a long time, and those end of the season games are going to really matter. So if you can get like a 2-game up lead on your opponents going into that final stretch, give yourself a little bit of breathing room there. and then we'll see what happens. But those are our predictions for week 3, Steelers versus Chargers. Drop yours down in the comment section below. We go live on this show every single Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. Also, make sure you check out Josh Yorris' show at 1:30 p.m. on Mondays. Both those shows are live. Thank you for joining us on the show today. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcast. Also, check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Still Curtain podcast. And thanks again for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.